Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today we're going to Masechtas Bava Batra Daf Chav Daled. We're going to begin on the top of Chav Daled Amud Aleph, the third line from the top. So we were learning that there's a din of rove. We go after the majority. We went after the pasuk Achri Rab Lahato. So on the other hand, we also have a concept of going Basar Karov, the closest thing. And we went out from when it comes to an Egor Rufa, when we have a person who died, we don't know who did the murder, so we measure the closest city has to go through the ceremony of bringing Egel Rufa. So in this we had the question in yesterday's daf, what happens if you have this conflict? On one hand you have Rov, on the other hand you have Karov. So what do we do? So on this the Gemara said that you have Rov and Karov, so the din is that you go after Rov. So that is how we establish that. Rov and Karov. So on this, the Gemara continues. We also have that which can support this, like the statement of Rabbi Chanina, that when you have Rov v'Karov, you go after the majority. It's brought down as follows. It says in Masechtas Nida, Dam shenimsa b'proizdor. Let's say you have blood that's found in the vaginal canal. Says Rashi, Nimsa dam isha bein koisli rechem mibchutz hakori bayis hachitzoin. So in this situation, we say as follows: Sveiko tame. In the case that we're not sure, we assume that she is tame. Says Rashi, Sveiko tame suffix ze tuma vadoyis, and we will consider this as she is absolutely tame. Midiktani shecheskaso min hamakor. Masveki yeshkan reish masnisa mestatis nida. So mashal beisha becheder prazer aliyah. It says that there's imagining three different rooms: a cheder, which is a room, the prazdor, then the aliyah. So the din is like this: dam hacheder, the blood which is found in the cheder is tameh, which is like inside. However, v'hu hamakor, that's like mamish inside of her body. V'haliyah, actually, v'prozder mebechutz. The prozder is on the outside. V'haliyah benuya al gabi bin shnehem, and like a roof, just like an upper floor is built above, so too v'dam haliyah tahar. So the aliyah is tahar, is dam tahar, but this is fine. This is actually going to be karaiv to the prozdor. So we're going to ask, why don't we say that we go basar karaiv? Okay. So let's continue in the Gemara from Nida. Dam shenimsa b'prozdor. So you have this dam which found in the vaginal canal. So sveika tame shecheskaso min a makor. We're going to assume that it comes from the makor, and therefore, because of that, that is considered to be like the dam hacheder. It's considered to be from the dam hacheder, and therefore, even though you have this prozdor, we're going to say that it is the dam is tameh. V'avga the ika aliyah to mikarva. Even though the top of her body, there is the aliyah, which is closer to her. So again, what do we see? That apparently we say we don't go basar karayv, right? So it must be that if we don't go basar karayv. So therefore, it's like a form of support that we don't go after karayv in that situation. We're going to go after rov, and rov dam is going to be tameh. Let's say it that way. So you have rov and karayv. So even though you have it's karv to the aliyah, nonetheless, we say that if it's found in the prozdor, even though it's karv to the aliyah, nonetheless she's going to be tameh. So says Rashi, why hoyel v'roiv damim matsuyim boy. Most dam is found there. V'loi omer min haliyah not of derech halul. So Rashi again elaborates and says this. Apparently, this case of dam nida is the same thing as rov karbo, and we see that we go basar roiv. So therefore, this is actually a pretty supportive proof to the din of Rabbi to Rabbi Chanina. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Amalei Rabba roiv matzi ka'amrid Rabba matzi lekel mandi aimer." So in this case, it's not just roiv, it's roiv motzoi. This is a situation where it is much more prevalent. It's not just like, sometimes. This is something in which, as Rashi says, rabim yoiser, it's the damim is much more prevalent that's going to come there. Shehin Tidirin lazu misham, that it's continuously flowing from there. However, odemei ha'aliyah ain teridin lotzes. The dam of the aliyah does not come out as often. So when we're dealing with Rabbi Karoi, Rabbi Chanina says then we go Basaroi, but not everyone holds like that necessarily. However, if we're dealing with a Rab Matsoi, where it's not just like a 51% chance, it's like almost a much higher probability, so then certainly everyone's going to hold you go Basaroi, which will be the case of this woman, the case of Dam Nida. Okay, so that's what we're saying. The Tani Rabbi Chia, Dam Hanim Sabra Prosdor. Again, if you have Dam which is found in the vaginal canal, Chayav Love Al Bias Mikdash. So you're Chayav Al Bias Mikdash, which means that we don't even consider it to be a suffix. Says Rashi, Domasaf Kinan La Kamevi Chul Azar Davade Dam Nidahu. We say for sure it's Dam Nida. The serpent will love us a truma. And we'll even burn truma. We're not going to say, well, it's a suffix, and therefore, whenever it's a suffix, we usually, or toilin, we kind of go in between. We don't allow you to eat the truma, but we're not going to burn it. So the fact that you're going to burn it, it shows it's not even a suffix. So how can it not be a suffix? If it's just rov. Rov, they're okay, fine, maybe go bust a rov, but it's still a suffix. No, it's matsui. So it's above that to the point that it's considered like vadai. We can actually derive from Rav Chia three things. Says Rashi, first of all, we see, as we have established, when you have roiv against a curve, you go after roiv. Shemamina ruba deraisa. We see that the concept of roiv is a din deraisa. Shemamina isa Rav Zera. There must be, he holds like the sheet of Rav Zera. Rav Zera alpha pisha dal sais medina nu always. Even if, let's say, the doors are closed, what does that mean? It says Rashi, Gabi teisha chenvius. Let's say you're dealing with a case of 9 stores. And this is brought down in the beginning of Masechtas Ksubas. V'nimsa halcha charoiv. Umoter. The afagav shadelos medina nu always. The leka elachad ruba lachshir roiv ha'ir. So what is this talking about? Sheteish, says Rashi, Sheteish Chanvio Shabal Morichas Basar Shchuta. 9 stores sell kosher meat. Va'achas Mecheres Nevelu. 1 sells non-kosher meat. Diika Milsa Debi'inan Be Tarti Rube. So over there's some that say 1 rov is not enough. You need 2 majorities, which would be the majority of stores, which the majority of them sell Basar Shchuta, but also you need that the doors need to be open. Says Rashi, you could go into Lasos Medinas but 2 chot. You have to be open. V'roiv tabachim sevivos Medina Yisrael the ikal mezel basar trei rubi lachshir roiv ha'ir v'roiv haboyim mechutzala. So the majority of the people in this city are its meat is kosher, it's shechted, but in the outside also there's a rov because most people who are sheichtim, let's say in this country, we'll just keep it simple, they're also do a proper shechita. So they have trei rubi. Now, according to Rav Zera actually does not require that you have to have actually the doors to be open, even if the doors are locked, which means that the only case all you have is 1 rov. So according to him, 1 rov is enough. Why? Because if we're dealing with this case of Dam Nida, it's comparable to a situation where we're dealing with 1 rov. When we're dealing with 1 rov, that is the situation which is comparable to this case of Rav Zera. And nonetheless, we still go basar roiv. So therefore, we're dealing with one rov when it comes to the isha, and we're dealing with 1 rov also according to Rav Zera. Now, v'harava hu dikaimer roibu matzi leikel man diaimer. Understand, Rava is the one who said that we're talking about a case of roiv umatzoi. We're not talking about a case of just a stam roiv, it's roiv umatzoi. So hadame Rava mahi. So he actually was chayzer. Now there's you only need rov, but you don't even need matzoi according to him. Itmar. Okay, so let's look at question 7. Amar Chia. Dam hanimsa beprosdor chayavan alav albias mikdash. Mehem hatlas l'shmamina l'divrei Rava. So what do we derive from here? First of all, Rav Karav halachachar roiv and ruba deraisa, and the third thing is Rav Zera the lobe inan trei rube uvetes chenviyais Shori afal pisha delasos medina nu always. As we said, even though the doors are closed or locked, that's fine. Okay. Weiter. Itmar. Chavis shitzafa benahar. Let's say you have a barrel that's floating in the river. So you have a barrel that's floating around, and we want to know its status. So Amarab nimsas keneged shirubi Yisrael mutter. If it came from a city in which the majority are Jews, so we can assume that wine is fine. Keneged shiruba nachar masira. However, it could be if it's from a majority city which are nachrim, we're going to go bust a rove there. So rove is clearly what we're establishing here. Shmuel Emer Fil Nimsas Keneged Ir Sharuba Yisrael Asira. Shmuel says no. Even if we're dealing with a situation where the majority of the people are Jewish, it's still going to be us, which is mashma that Shmuel doesn't go basa roiv. Now Amar Mahai Dikra Asoy. So let's say from this pasuk that's derived, the lema of Rav Chanina Kamivli, Damar Islay Rabbi Chanina, Mar Leslay Rabbi Chanina. So one of them holds that maybe we're dealing with karoiv, and nonetheless, one of them holds that when you have a roiv with karoiv, we go basar rov, and the other one says you don't go basar roiv, and that's the reason if the roiv are yidin, so maybe that's what we're talking about, all right? So, lo the kolayalma isalhud Rav Chanina, all of them actually will go basar rov. So in that case, if there's rov Yisrael, so what's the problem? The Mar Save, one holds im isa de mahai dikra asoy. If you want to actually say that mahai dikra asoy, and look in Rashi, mahai dikra shem mocha yisu al nahar pras. This is referring to a place which is by the Euphrates. There's no Yisrael there, but who will malam pras and that's where this potentially had come from. So therefore, you have roiv Jews, but karoiv maybe in this situation it's karoiv to happen. So of course, as we go basa rov, no, really maybe they all hold like this, but in this case it's a little bit different. So first of all, let's look at Rashi. Rav Leis and Rabbi Chanina ve'azal basar kurva. You go basar karv. Shmuel azar basar ruba. Fine. So he said no. So what in this case is different because since it could be coming from this location, we know that that's the separation. So akule upishuri havi matbila. All of these waters which are swirling and these powerful rapids certainly would have broken it. Says Rashi, Yeshmi sham va'ad kan shamayim misaklim misgalgalin kagilgul b'makam echad. It's just like going around in circles in one place. It's like very powerful rapids. And machmas kipe saloim aruchim, because there's like a lot of rocks. So if a person goes like whitewater rafting, you'll see that there's the rocks which interfere with the flow of the water is what causes a lot of the rapids, and that's what Rashi's alluding to over here. So the barrel would have gotten stuck and not made it this far, so it must be the Jews' wine. Maybe it's the fact that the water current is so powerful that is what brought it here, and therefore maybe it did come from the Nachar. Okay, hahu chatzba. Okay, so now we continue the following case. Hahu chatzba dechamra. So you have this case of wine, says Rashi, which we'll get to. Dishtakach bepardesa de arla. Now near this wine, it's near a orchard in which there is arla. Says Rashi bekerem shel arla. So you have wine, but you also have a vineyard in which is arla, which is usser. So Shari Ravina. So Ravina said that this is perfectly fine, and Rashi says v'lochosh. We're not concerned shema mekerem zeh ganav hayayin zeh. We don't have the concern that possibly that this wine barrel was stolen or taken from this particular area, and therefore because of that we can just assume that it's not from here. So so maybe it's because he holds like the din of Rav Chanina, that even though it's karoiv to the kerem, but we're going to go basar roiv. No, shani hasam di'im mignav mina. It's different because if in fact it was stolen from this vineyard, that's snui b'gavei lo mitzani. Says Rashi, ein derech ganavim l'hatzia hayayin b'makam shiganvuhu. A person would not typically keep the wine that he stole in the very same place that he stole it. Because as Rashi says, Mishum de Misyar Shemi Yimseho Dairech Hanavim, the people that are involved in the grapes in the vineyard are going to end up discovering this barrel of wine. So therefore, it's an assumption that this actually did not come from this place, from this vineyard of Arla, because this Ganav would never have done so. Bahani Mili Chamra. This is only when we're dealing with wine itself. But if it's the grapes themselves, then it is possible that they would actually do this. So let's look at question TA8. Okay. So it says like this: two answers. Either because we have roy v'karv holachachar roiv, or mishum de'iganvu mishum, if you would have stolen it, lo hoyimatztin betocha, you wouldn't have hidden it in the same place that he stole. You don't hide something in the place where you steal something. It's just illogical to do such a thing. Okay. All right, weiter. Hanhu ziki. The chamer. There were these flasks of wine, dishtachchan beikofoi, that they were found. It says Rashi, tamunin, hidden ben gafanim, between the vines in a vineyard, and this belonged to a Jewish person. So sharnuhu Rava. So Rava said that these flasks of wine are able to be consumed. So Chanina. It must be he doesn't hold a Rabbi Chanina. Again, according to Rabbi Chanina, we go Basar Raiv. But over here, the fact that he's saying, so let's say we're talking about Rov are not Jews. Says Rashi, Lo Chachar Raiv El Achar Kov V'Kan Yisrael Matsuim Yosim Menachem. Here, there's Yisrael are found more. V'Lazin Basar Rubad Alma. We don't go Basar Rubad Alma. Anyway, so the point is that we go Basar Karov and we assume that it's okay, that there's Jews that are here, so therefore we go Basar Karov. If we go Basar Rov, then it wouldn't then it wouldn't be okay because Rov are non-Jews. And I said no, Shani Hasam, it's different in this case as we continue to Chavdal and Aleph, the Ruba Dishfuchoi Yisrael Ninhu. The majority, as Rashi says, Shayvchi Yayin Min Hachavis, that pour wine from barrels into flasks to sell them to the travelers, those people are Yisrael. So therefore, we can just assume that this is a Jew's profession, therefore it was a Jew that did it. The Hanili B'Ravvi, that's only if it's big, says Rashi, Delekel Mechash L'Rubad Alma. We don't therefore have to concern ourselves of the majority of the people in the world. That maybe it fell from a traveler. If they're very small, maybe it did fall from a traveler, and therefore it may not be good wine. It may not be kosher wine. The Ika Ravravi Bahadayu, let's say there's Ravravi together with the small ones, Amar Ba'avure Havi Manchi. So we're going to say that maybe this is how they were like measured out. It says Rashi of Yisrael, and they actually all belong to the Jews. And even the small ones actually belong to the Jews as well. It says next Mishnah. It says Masnisen. Marchikin esa'ilon men'ir esrim v'chamish ama. That a person is supposed to distance a tree from the city, 25 amos. And the Gemara is going to explain, as Rashi quotes, Mishum Noi, Ha'ir. It's to beautify the city, because if you have too many trees too close to the city, it takes away from the beauty of the city. V'charuv, Uvashikamo, when it comes to these other trees in which they have a lot of branches and leaves, Chamishim Amma. There you have to distance the tree even further from the city. Abashol Oimer Kol Ilon Srak, any barren tree that doesn't produce fruit, Chamishim Amma, you also have to distance yourself 5. And Rashi says, why? Because Ganai Hu La'ir, because since it doesn't have fruit, it's a Ganai, it's an embarrassment or disgrace to the city. Fine. Ve'ima ir kadma, let's say the city came first and this person wrongfully planted that tree afterwards, kotzetz. Then the tree is cut off, a nice and dumb, because he did the wrong thing, because he wasn't supposed to plant it so close to the city, so he's not going to be compensated for his losses. If let's say it was the tree was first and then afterwards they built the city, so the fact is they didn't do anything wrong, so therefore for that reason he will be compensated, but he will not be able to keep his tree there. Suffix zekadam, kaititz ve'eno noisin damim. So if we're unsure, either way, we always cut down the tree. The whole question is which came first. So we're going to not pay you unless you can bring a raya that you planted the tree before the city was built. Says the Gemara. So my time, what is the whole reason for this? As we said, so because of beautification of the city, we want the trees a little bit far away from the city. So maybe it's because as it's brought down in Mishnah, in the last paragraph of Masechtas Erechin, says Rashi, Umigrash elf amahu, the Migrash area is 1,000 amos. And where you have a migrash, which is like an open area, you cannot make into a field. Says Rashi, lo stay lavan, lo stay ilan. It cannot be for grains, it can't be trees. You cannot plant trees anywhere near that area. So let's read Rabbi Lezer. There's an opinion that you actually could make a migrash into a field and vice versa. However, because of the beautification of the city, we don't want these trees nearby, even according to him. So then why do we even need to mention trees? That's actually only referring to planting grains. However, when it comes to a migrash to a sada, or vice versa, if we're just dealing with trees we don't care about, and that is allowed according to them. However, over here we're going to prohibit even trees. Low. So why would we make a distinction between planting grains and trees regarding a migrash to a sada or vice versa? The sanya. Karpave, so if you have a karpave of land, which is more than 2 saw, shehukaf ladira, and it is something in which could be used for residential, says Rashi. So Saim hu shir chatzar mishkan. We know that this is the same measurement as the courtyard of the Mishkan. So if you have this area which is very large, nizra rubo harihu kigina v'aser. If a person would plant in the majority of it, so it's considered to like have the status of a garden, and therefore it will be aser. Says Rashi, Yasir mebeso sayim shehukaf ladira hu mutal atalt b'kuloi. So if, let's say, if it's hukaf ladira, normally you are allowed to carry there. However, if you plant there, so therefore you end up changing the status of it being for a dira, for living, because you're really using it for planting. And therefore it's just like has the status of a garden because you did most of that area as a planting. And therefore because of that, you're not allowed to carry in that area anymore. Nita rubo, however, let's say you planted trees in the majority of this area, so it's allowed. So therefore we see, as Rashi be ilanos and hilanos mavatlin taras dirasa mimena baharihu kechatzer shlif nehabatim shekafua ladir umuter. So a person would still be able to carry in that area. So again, we see this distinction between trees and planting grains is whether or not, if we're dealing with a karpef, which is yosem besayim, which is hokaladira, if you you could be mavatal that as a place of dira, of living quarters, if you create it like a garden, but not if you put trees there. That doesn't change the status. Anyway, again, we see this distinction between this, and therefore we're also going to make that distinction between making a migrash to a sada and vice versa. So gabi bor. How come, as we've learned elsewhere, when it comes to a pit, tikatani, kaitzates, let's say you have a tree near a pit, so kaitzates, you chop down the tree, but nice and dumb it. But you will compensate that individual for their losses. That's the din. How come our Mishnah says that you chop it down, but you don't give them money? Maybe they should be compensated, just like in the case of our of the Mishnah over there. So we say there's a distinction. Amar Kahana, Kidra debe shutvi lo chamima lo kiriri. If you're dealing with a pot, if you're the only cook in town, so you can make it hot, you can make it cold. But when you have more than too many chefs in the kitchen, it doesn't get hot or it doesn't get hot or cold. Which means we're making a distinction between Rabbim and a Yachid. Says Rashi, Shezeh samech al zeh, each one is relying on each other. Avkan demea iwan. So too when it comes to the value of the tree, mi itnam. Who's going to pay this guy who has the tree near the city? Im basel hatilam al bnei ir ko echad oimer mimeni lo yaschilu. Nibsa iwan oimed va'ir maguna ve'en zet tiferet Eretz Yisrael. If you say, you know what, first I need to be compensated before we're going to chop this tree down, no one's going to end up paying him. It's because we're not dealing with one person. So therefore, because of that, they're never going to chop down the tree, and therefore it's going to take away from the beauty of the city. And therefore we say you chop it down, you get compensated. However, when it comes to a yachid, so in that situation, there will be compensation, and it's going to be coming from that one individual. Okay. Again, because we're dealing with a situation where the tree was before. So therefore, the tree was before. Again, it's an in Elon Kadam Kaitis Venois and Dumim. However, if it was the other way around, not. And also by suffix, not. So my kushit, Dilma Shani, Hazekad Ram, Hazekad Yachid. You can just answer Pashit, there's a difference between a Yachid and a Rabbim. Right? The damages of a Rabbim, of a city, is much more significant, and therefore you won't be compensated by case of a doubt. So it says that if the tree came first, you do pay. Why doesn't he say, why don't you pay me first, then chop down the tree? So as we said, that if you're going to end up waiting, says Rashi, im basal hamtin ad matan mois, if you're going to get paid before the tree is chopped down, yamun zelu arch yamim, you're going to end up waiting a long time, because there's, again, this is unfortunately with government, if they're involved in something as opposed to the private business, things drag out. And that's the interesting, perhaps, analogy of all this. Question 8. Amar Rav Kahana, Kidra de Bei Shutvi, a pot for partners, it doesn't get hot, doesn't get cold. Al Chamim Al Karira. Al Ezedin, Amar Rav Kahana, Hamoshel Hazeh. So Maskana, we're talking about a tree which came before the city, that we say you do chop down the tree first, and then only afterwards you get paid. We don't say first chop down the tree. We don't say first you'll get paid and then chop down the tree, because since we're dealing with a Rabbim, so it's going to take a whole lot of time for that to happen. TB9, which is the same question. Let's see what I wrote. Imish Elon Samach Kaisel Sha'ir. Oz Elon Kaidim Sarch Al Kol Al Korachach Al Kol Panim Likt Soras Elon. That's it, to chop down the tree. Tchila V'yachem Mekabel Damim. Dim Lehepich Loy Oiker Elon. You're not going to cut it down. Beglal Shehu Beshutvin, because it's partners. Obetzibor Lo Noistim Lehem Mamoin Lizman Ad Zman Meruba. Okay, so basically the idea is you're going to end up waiting an extended period of time before this gets chopped down. Savik Zek Kodim Savik Zek Kodim Kodim Venus and Daman. So Ma'ishno Bebor, how come when it comes to a pity, Amrlo Yakoitz, don't cut it? Hasam Devadai, because over there, Devadai Lavo Mekatskoi, it won't be chopped down. If you know for sure that the tree was before the pit, you don't have to chop down the tree. However, Sveikanami Loyamrin and Loykites. So in Suffolk, we're not going to tell you to cut down the tree over there, because by Yochid, by the boar. Over here, there's no question. No matter what, you have to cut down the tree, even if the tree was before the city. So sveikonami amrin and lekites. So you all definitely have to cut down the tree in our case. V'yimishim demei, if it comes to compensation, amrin le'aisi rayu shkoil. You have to bring a raya that, in fact, you planted the tree before the city was there, and therefore only afterwards, after you do that, then you'll get paid. Says the next Mishnah. Says the Masnisa. Marchikin as garden kavuam in the ear chamishimama. You have to distance a permanent granary. Says Rashi, a garin kavua is kavu, my kavu. So what is that regarding a threshing house? 50 amos. Rashi says mipnei hamoitz, because of the husks or the chaff. Hamazik as b'nei ir, ends up damaging the people in the city. Kishu zaira, when it comes to the winnowing process, it's going to be all over the place. So it has to be 50 amos away from the city. V'yasa adam, back in the Mishnah, v'yasa adam garin kavua b'tak shalo. You can't put this in your own property, to make sure again that it stays in your property, so therefore it has to be in 50 amos away from any border in any direction. And then the Mishnah says, Umarchik min netiyaisav shel chavero, if the distance from your friend's trees, umaniro, and his plowing, b'chdei shel yazik. Okay, so let's see Rashi. Rashi says, Menira shel chavero, Gemar mafarish, my hezek, demoitza near he harisha. We're talking about the plowing, okay, in the summer months. B'chdei shel yazik, says Rashi, hai shiura, this measurement, mashma batza b'chamisha amma, it sounds like it's less than 50 amos, so we're going to wonder why in the ratio it's 50 amos, and why over here apparently it's less. Says the Gemara. So ma'ishna ratio, ma'ishna seifa. So again, we ask the kasha. So Rabbi seifa atayin legarin shena kavua. The seifa, we're dealing with a threshing house which is not kavua, and therefore it doesn't have to be as big of a separation. So hechidami garin shena kavua. What's that? An example of that. So Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina kol sheinu zara barachas. Any situation where you don't actually winnow with a winnowing tool. Rav Ashi Omer Matam Karmer. Actually, the Reish and the Seifa are connected. My tam arche goyichin kavua min ha'ir chamishim amos. Why do you have to distance 50 amos? Kadishul yazik, just so it doesn't damage. So really, it's the same thing. Says Rashi, shir the Seifa karesha. There's actually no difference. So Meisvei marchikin garin kavua min ha'ir chamishim amos. You have to distance 50 amos. If Geshem shemarchikin min ha'ir chamishim amos, just like you have to distance 50 amos. Kach marchikin midoyav mikishyaisa mitiyaisa menir shel chaver chamishim amos. So too, you have to distance yourself from all these different things. There are gourds and the like, and trees, 50 amos, kadishul yasik. No, bishlam or Rab, I can understand according to the answer of Rab, which was the first answer, making a distinction between the Reish and the Seifa. So he makes sense. Why? Bishlam, actually the other way around. Bishlam or Rav Ashi, I can understand that Rav Ashi says a matam, that's just 50 amos, because it said that's what it sounds like. El Abaye kasha. It's according to Abaye, who says that there's a difference between the Reish and the Seifa. This is mashma that even the Seifa is 50 amos. Bishlam mikish yosem adiliyos diazolav kaviyasi belibe. I can understand all these gourds and the like because the dust of the threshing floor could potentially go and ruin this stuff. So it's going to ruin the vegetables. What's the whole issue of the plowing? So Rav Abba bar Zada v'itema Rabbi Rav Abba bar Zutra Nimnei. The reason why we're concerned even with regard to that as we continue to Chaf Hamad Aleph she'oisa oisa golal, because you make the fields muddy. Says Rashi, marble zevel is a lot of fertilizer. V'sarif has Zerayim shenizrubo, and ends up ruining the seeds that are there. Okay, we're gonna stop there, and let's see, do we have another question? Question 8 we saw. TA, TB, Adkan.